Farmers are just really struggling to figure out the exact supply and demand scenario. And the war in Ukraine has really led animal feed prices to skyrocket and fuel prices as well.
Summer has officially begun, but this year your backyard grill might be a little quieter. Ground beef and chicken prices have soared to record highs, forcing many of us to rethink what ends up on our plates. So, who's buying less meat? Why are costs shifting so dramatically? And what does it mean for the meals we love? First off, let's rewind a bit. During COVID-19, meat processing plants, the kind that handle beef, pork, and chicken, were hit really hard. Workers got sick, lockdowns hammered production, and supply chains broke down. Plants shut or slowed, meaning fewer animals got processed, which squeezed supply. It was chaotic, and for a while this disruption meant less meat was coming through to retailers, and costs began piling up everywhere. That stress didn't stop with plants, though. Farmers were already feeling the pinch from soaring input costs: grain for feed, fertilizer to grow that grain, fuel to run farms and transport. Everything became more expensive. The war in Ukraine made things even worse because grain prices shot up and fertilizer became costlier. All these rising costs cascade down the chain. Farmers pay more to raise livestock, processors pay more to run plants, and eventually, consumers pay more at the checkout.
It looks at where existing trends in agricultural commodity and fish markets at national, regional, and global levels are expected to take us over the next 10 years. And this year, the projections go to 20.
On top of that, you can't treat this as just a US story. It's part of a global web. Demand, trade flows, exports, and imports all matter. According to the OECD FAO Agricultural Outlook, what's especially striking is that real meat prices, that means inflation adjusted, are projected to fall over the medium term, thanks to slowing demand, lower feed costs, and productivity improvements. The outlook also points out something many might not expect. In high-income countries, per-person meat consumption is either leveling off or even shrinking. People are getting more conscious about health, the environment, and animal welfare, and that's driving some of the change. So, why exactly did beef and chicken prices go so high in the first place? Let's start with beef. In many regions, cattle herds were depleted, whether from previous economic stress, disease, or other pressures, and you don't rebuild a herd overnight. That constrained supply even as demand was still there. Meanwhile, feed and fertilizer costs surged, especially with the war in Ukraine pushing up grain prices. Farmers had to spend more to raise each animal. Processing companies, squeezed by these rising costs, passed some of that burden onto consumers. For high-income markets, though, beef is increasingly being substituted or traded down because it's expensive. People are leaning into cheaper or alternative proteins. While beef production may grow, per capita beef consumption in many rich countries is likely to drop as consumers reevaluate. Then there's poultry and pork. The thing about poultry is that it has a shorter production cycle and is usually more flexible, which makes it more resilient. But it's not immune. Feed costs are higher now, and outbreaks of bird flu or other diseases have raised both risk and cost. Still, in the long run, the outlook for non-ruminant meats, that's poultry and pig, is more optimistic. The reports suggest their supplies could ease up, helping drive down real prices. On the demand side, many consumers have been favoring chicken over red meat because it's cheaper, but not everyone is untouched by economic strain, so even that option is feeling pressure.
Just a growing world population and more people entering the middle class and starting to eat chicken or pork globally. That's, maybe the top factor longer term. So it's...
All of this sets up a pretty surprising but real possibility. Demand is crashing in some markets, and with supply adjusting, we could be on the path toward lower meat prices after the current turmoil. That's where the prices slashed narrative comes from. As demand weakens, especially in rich countries, and as producers become more efficient, real meat prices are expected to come down. From a consumer point of view, this matters a lot. If meat becomes more affordable again, people might shift back to buying more or just feel less of a pinch when choosing their protein. but more broadly, it means something is changing in how we consume meat. During this season, summer grilling, burgers, and hot dogs, some of those traditional summer staples might be less dominant if prices remain high, or if people decide to dial back on meat altogether. Looking ahead, the picture is complex. Meat production will keep rising by around 13% over the next decade, thanks to productivity gains, efficient breeding, and better yields. But the price trends are nuanced. Real ruminant meat prices, beef and sheep, may peak around 2027 and then ease, while non-ruminant meat prices, pork and poultry, could drop more sharply, even by nearly 20% below base values in real terms. Add to that risks like animal disease outbreaks, climate shocks, and trade policy shifts, and you have a pretty volatile but potentially game-changing outlook. Meat prices are dancing on a tightrope right now. We've gone through a period of huge cost pressure, supply chain shocks, and global uncertainty. But the medium-term future might offer relief if demand stays soft and supply becomes more efficient. For you, as a consumer, it means the meat on your plate could get cheaper again, or at least more stable. And for our society, it's a signal of a deeper shift. We might be entering an era where how we produce and eat meat evolves more fundamentally. Right now, many people are scratching their heads because meat prices, especially for beef and chicken, felt like they were floating into the stratosphere. But if you zoom out a little, the big picture shows something more complicated. Meat prices are projected to fall over the medium term, and that's not just wishful thinking. It's backed by data on how supply, demand, and productivity are all shifting. Part of the reason people are talking about slashed prices is because in some markets, demand for meat is actually crashing. For beef and pork in particular, consumption per person is dropping. In high-income countries, a lot of consumers are pulling back. Why? Well, cost is one reason. Meat isn't cheap, especially with everything else going up. But it's not only economics. Health concerns, ethical worries about animals, and environmental consciousness are pushing more people away from red meat.
Herds across the country, and experts say the cost of meat is likely going to keep climbing.
Come on. Come on. Not today.
It's feeding time.
At the same time, producers are adjusting. The classic hog cycle is alive and well. Sometimes production overshoots demand, then demand weakens, and prices come under pressure. In pork, for example, there are signs that supply is catching up, or even overshooting, while demand isn't rising to match. When you have this mismatch, it puts downward pressure on prices. And that's what's feeding into this narrative that real prices could be slashed. On the supply side, several things are going on. For ruminant meats like beef, there was a period when herds got drawn down, and rebuilding herds takes time. That constrained supply, which helped push nominal beef prices higher in the short run. But according to some reports, once herds rebuild, supply will loosen, and real beef prices are projected to peak around 2027, then gradually decline. Meanwhile, feed costs, a huge part of raising animals, are expected to come down in real terms. As feed becomes relatively cheaper, producers' costs ease, which helps bring down meat prices. Now, non-ruminant meats like pork and poultry are even more interesting in this picture. The non-ruminant meat prices, so pigs and chickens, in real terms, will decline more sharply than beef. Pork and chicken producers are expected to make productivity gains. Technology, breeding, and supply chain improvements are going to make production more efficient. Because of that, these meats could become relatively cheaper than beef, driving more consumers to choose them, especially if they're worried about budget or just want something less resource-intensive. On the demand side, the crash in red meat, particularly beef and pork, is linked to more than just prices. In many wealthy countries, consumers are becoming more selective. Some are shifting toward chicken because it's cheaper or perceived as healthier, while others are reducing meat consumption overall because of environmental concerns. That kind of shift in preference matters a lot. If people stop buying more expensive meat as often, or just downsize how much they eat, that saps demand and creates room for price drops later. And here's the real kicker. Even with all of this talk about crashing demand, global production is still expected to rise. Meat production is projected to go up in the next decade, largely thanks to productivity improvements, especially in chicken and pig sectors. So, more meat is being produced, but demand growth, especially per capita demand in rich countries, is weak or even negative for red meat. That gap is exactly what could drive real prices down. So when you hear that meat prices are being slashed, it's not entirely hyperbole. The crash in demand isn't just temporary, it's part of a longer-term trend, especially in places where people are rethinking red meat. Meanwhile, supply is responding and productivity is improving, which could make it cheaper to raise animals over time. Combine that with the projected drop in feed costs, and you've got a strong case for inflation-adjusted meat prices coming down significantly. I know it sounds a little contradictory. Right now, meat feels expensive, but the forecast says things could get easier. But that's the beauty, or messiness, of economic cycles. Big cost pressures today don't necessarily mean permanently higher prices, especially when demand is wobbling and supply is smartening up. For consumers, this could mean some relief down the road, especially if the shift keeps growing. For producers, it's a challenge. They need to balance how much to expand, knowing demand might not bounce back to its previous highs. And for global markets, it's a critical moment. Price trends, trade flows, and productivity gains could reshape how meat is produced and consumed. In short, yes, there are real cost pressures today, but the medium-term outlook suggests that real meat prices could decline. That's because demand is weakening in key markets, supply is adjusting, and efficiency is improving. So, prices slashed isn't just a flashy headline, it's a real possibility rooted in how markets and people are changing.
Seen beef prices at this high ever in my life. It's kind of scary for me.
Kim Nygaard, the owner of a small butcher shop outside of Seattle, says that she's constantly looking for best bargains.
Consumer budgets are really tight right now. Inflation and the high cost of living have squeezed a lot of people, which means that discretionary spending, like splurging on luxury cuts of meat or firing up the grill every other weekend, is getting scaled back. That's especially true for red meat, which tends to carry a premium price. When your grocery budget is under pressure, those steak nights or burger barbecues start to feel like a bigger deal than they used to. But it's not just money. More and more folks are also rethinking meat for health, environmental, and ethical reasons. People are becoming conscious about animal welfare and climate change, and many are cutting down on red meat in favor of poultry or even plant-based proteins. That shift is especially strong in rich countries where per-person meat consumption is stagnating or even going down, according to the latest reports. This doesn't mean everyone is giving up meat, but the appetite for expensive beef or pork is cooling off in some places. At the same time, global demand growth for meat is weaker than before. In many high-income countries, the per capita consumption of beef and pork is projected to slow or even drop in favor of cheaper or more sustainable options like chicken. On top of that, trade patterns are shifting. Countries like China, once huge importers of meat, are starting to rely more on their own production. China's share of global meat imports may decline because its domestic supply is strengthening. That ripple effect in trade flows matters. If big importers aren't buying as much, that changes how global markets operate. Then there's the seasonal and trend stuff. Think summer grilling. You might expect everyone to go wild on burgers and hot dogs in summer, but with high ground beef and chicken prices, some people might pull back. That slice of meat for the grill line in the budget is tightening, and not everyone is keeping up the same BBQ traditions when protein costs bite.
It's too much because you don't want to scare off the consumer, but you kind of have to pass on the buck. I mean, you have no choice to stay in operation. So demand has stayed very strong. Prices are absolutely...
On the supply side, things are just as complicated. Input costs have been through the roof. Feed grain, fertilizer, fuel, all of that went up, especially after the war in Ukraine disrupted exports and supply chains. Fertilizer prices surged because gas, a key input in fertilizer manufacturing, was constrained. When feed costs spike, it becomes more expensive to raise animals, which in turn pushes up how much meat costs at the store. Disease risks are also real. Outbreaks like bird flu, pig diseases, or other livestock health scares raise biosecurity costs, force culls, and make producers more cautious. Those risks jack up production costs or reduce supply, and that can feed into higher meat prices or volatile supply. But there's a flip side. Productivity is improving. According to the OECD FAO Outlook, yields in poultry and pig farming are expected to rise significantly. Better breeding, better management, more efficient systems, all of that reduces the cost per unit of meat over time. So while costs are high now, producers are working smarter, and that could push real meat prices downward.
Putting a premium on all categories. For many ranchers, especially those about to retire, that kind of a windfall is hard to resist.
The farmer is not willing to take on more work to increase his.
For beef, rebuilds are happening. Herd sizes in many countries were drawn down, and it takes time to bring them back up. That constraint helped push prices higher recently. But the outlook suggests that once herds recover and supply loosens, things could change. With feed costs cooling in real terms and herd productivity improving, inflation-adjusted beef prices are expected to peak and then decline. On the other hand, pork and chicken, the non-ruminant meats, are pretty central to the prices slashed talk. Those sectors are seeing the biggest productivity gains, according to the outlook. As production becomes more efficient and with weaker import demand from big players like China, real prices for pig and poultry meat may fall much more sharply than for beef. The report even projects non-ruminant real prices could end nearly 20% below base period levels. And don't forget market cycles. The classic hog cycle is at play here. Producers ramp up, supply overshoots demand, then demand shrinks, and suddenly there's too much pork. Those cycles are painful, but they're very real, and they help explain why prices might collapse down the line, not just spike. Putting it all together, here's the picture. Demand for red meat is weakening in many rich countries because of cost, health, and environmental concerns. People are shifting to chicken or eating less meat overall. On the supply side, even though costs are high now, producers are becoming more efficient, especially in poultry and pig production. That combination, weaker demand plus smarter supply, is creating room for slashed real meat prices in the near to medium future. For you and me, as consumers, this could be good news. Meat might get more affordable in real terms down the road, particularly chicken and pork. It might change how we grill this summer, or which meats we lean on for dinner. For producers, though, it's a tricky balancing act. How much to produce, how much to invest, knowing demand could stay soft. There are risks, of course. Disease outbreaks, climate shocks, or renewed input cost spikes could derail the downward trend. Trade policy could change, and any new supply disruption might push prices back up. So the slashed prices scenario isn't guaranteed, but it's grounded in serious economics and data. In short, yes, meat prices feel high now, but the forces at play suggest real inflation-adjusted prices could come down. Falling demand, higher productivity, and changing consumer habits are all lining up. So when you hear someone say meat prices are being slashed, they might just be onto something.